Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. So today we're talking to a dear friend of mine, Emma Montgomery. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Leo Burnett Australia, formerly the President and Chief Strategy Officer of Leo Burnett USA, formerly the Global Chief Strategy Officer at TWA, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But interestingly, starting her career as a researcher in the media side of the business. So first of all, welcome, Emma. So great to have you on.
Thank you, Clive. It's lovely to see you.
Amen. She can see me, even though we're not producing visuals.
The magic of radio. Yeah.
There you go. So let's start where I finished there, which is, how does a person start as a researcher in media and land up as CEO of a fantastic agency, one that I had the privilege of working for a few years? I mean, what was the career arc? What was the master plan? Was there a master plan? How did it all happen? Because it's a phenomenal career.
Thank you. Yes. No, I think anyone who would look at my career would say there is no master plan, and they would be right. It's interesting. I had no intention of getting into advertising at all. I finished uni. I did a liberal arts degree majoring in politics and history, and my intention at the end of that was to, go into social policy or be a speechwriter. I was fascinated by sort of the machinations of politics, actually, and wanted to be, go and work for a party. Interestingly, what they don't tell you, it was funny, I did my degree and got to the end of it and kind of went, cool, what do I do? And I hadn't really thought about it at all, because I was having a lovely time just sort of learning. And in hindsight, I would never change a thing, because I think the lack of pressure about what do I do at the end of this was actually liberating, in terms of the potential of it. So I got to the end of my degree. In Australia, I wanted to go and work for the public service. Like I wanted to be a bureaucrat. Very sad, I think. And so I sat a thing called the public service test, where they figure out where to put you. And I failed. So I had an honours degree in politics, and I failed massively. And I failed because the thing that they were looking for was linear thinking. They were, the test was all, circle, square, triangle, what comes next? And my brain's like, I have no idea what comes next, and I can't figure it out. And it was interesting because that really rocked my confidence. And I was like, oh, well, I must be terrible. And so I sort of went to the careers service at university, and I was like, what should I do? And there was a sign on the careers service for a research job at a company called Leo Burnett. And I'd never heard of Leo Burnett, had never heard of advertising, had never really been engaged in marketing. I came from a family of teachers and civil servants and people who, came from like the public service side of things. And so I had no idea about the commercial world at all. And so I went for a job here, and I, as part of my degree, had done a big piece of analysis around voting behaviour. And so I just happened to know how to use a piece of software, actually. And they were like, you have no qualifications to do this job whatsoever, but you can use this software system. And I got the job. And I spent most of my time trying to figure out what job I had gotten, because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about this industry. I didn't know. So I started as a media researcher at Leo Burnett when it was all full service, before Starcom got spun out. And I think, how do you start as a researcher and get into this? Well, I think when I think about what is foundational to my skill set, it is curiosity and behavioral understanding. And so I think from the very beginning, probably because of, I've got an arts degree in sort of arguing, probably a good way to go into advertising, because it's critical thinking. And so the thing that I would always look at, even when I was doing like deep analysis for media and research, most of what my brain would think about is, what do the numbers tell me? Not what are the numbers? Sort of always the story behind things. And I loved that job. I actually work with my first sort of boss in media research. My global boss was a lovely, fantastic, brilliant woman called Kate Sirkin, who you might know.
Yep,
Um,
I've
and
heard of her.
and she, I mean, Kate's brilliant, and Kate's sort of mind, again, it's not his that, I think there's a lot of research that is sort of fairly technical, and it's mostly about, the outputs. But again, she was sort of constructing really innovative ways of, well, if we put this and this together, what happens? And the idea of, why do we do anything? How do things work? How do we break them down to understand? Because once you understand, you can build it back up to do anything. And I loved that so much, because it was, I think I hadn't realized, because I'd done mostly qualitative things, I hadn't realized just how much my brain actually is quite rational. And so those sorts of things make a lot of sense for me, and I think I can bring the other side. And so, fast forward to all the things that I've done in my career, it really has been chase down the things that are interesting. And the things that interest me are usually, how does that work? And the how does that work has gone from, how do people work? How does media work? How do channels work? How does advertising work? To how do agencies work? How do clients work? How do categories work? And how do markets work? So I think that's sort of my trajectory, and maybe that my fundamental kind of core skill is um, being able to unpack things and get to the heart of them.
So, but by the way, I agree with you in your assessment of your first boss. One day I'll try and get her on my podcast. But it's funny. I didn't intend to talk about this, but I did not know your story about public service.
Mm.
I missed that somewhere along the line. But I heard this saying once, because I use it a lot, and I'm pretty certain I didn't make it up, because I don't think I've had an original thought in a long time. But there was this notion that no election was ever won on the facts.
Hmm.
And in a way, it's the same. No brands are necessarily built on the facts. And by I mean that, it's like you and I have talked a lot in our time together when we work together about behavioral science.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in your perspective. That do those parallels, because the humans are humans, and how they behave. Look at Brexit, or look at any referendum or any political thing. It's not the facts; it's the emotional construct and how they interpret the facts. And oftentimes it's not logical, or at least on the
Oh,
surface of it. Does that
absolutely.
track?
Absolutely, absolutely, and sort of the work that I was doing as part of my degree was working with big electoral data sets on what correlations could you find in voting behaviour. And so I remember I did one thing, which was trying to understand: do you naturally get more conservative as you age? Like, is there a tendency with an aging population that you will always have a conservative government? And you can't prove it, because the thing is, people are really, they're predictably unpredictable. So there's some things that are, sort of core drivers, and you can see those. But you're right, that the thing that makes us interesting and hard to manage, is the humanity of it. It isn't logical, and it isn't rational. It's actually the marriage of, often the rational is the story we tell ourselves to justify the emotional. And the thing that we are sort of mostly thinking about is, I want to, vote this way or think this way because I am fundamentally, we were talking earlier about some of the things that are happening in Australia and the transition to out of old fuels to new green energy. Fundamentally, the reason people would vote against that is fear for their jobs, right? So there's a
Yep.
fundamental sort of, I am afraid, and I can't. And no one said, because I. So really, rather than, and people play on those fears, and there's a reality to some of that. But what hasn't happened in a lot of those instances is well, what's the upside? And politics is rarely upside. It's usually, the stories are all downside, which is interesting, because marketing's mostly upside. We're going to tell you the most positive thing we can think, and I kind of like the kind of the shade of both of those spaces. That actually, it's I think on marketing it can be kind of manipulative, and we don't want to do that. But I think we can also use our power for good, and start to build the behaviors that we need and craft the actions that we need that actually could really fundamentally change societies. So it's funny. I think we've got more influence and power than we use it for.
Well, no doubt about it. But in order to do that, you have to have an incredibly robust client agency environment. And I think it's been 3 years since we've been together over a drink and me ranting and raving and you sort of helping me. So let's pick up where we left off at
Yeah,
that
where's
bar
the
in
beer though,
Chicago.
Clive? We need a beer.
We need to be here. But as you well know, I get pretty wound up on this topic because I've both, sat on both sides of the table, and I'm still deeply, deeply concerned about what I see as a race to the bottom.
Yeah,
And I place blame everywhere. So it's not
yeah,
just like bad client, bad agency. I think there's this incredibly well orchestrated codependency between clients and agencies to drive to the bottom. And by that, I mean, um, and I'm not necessarily implying it's negative and well thought through intent. I'm just saying it's happening
yeah,
where clients are inadvertently or by choice driving margins out of the business.
yeah,
And the consequential outcome of driving margins out of the business is talent leaves.
yeah,
And I would say the great resignation in advertising happened long before COVID because it's a really tough environment. And when you don't have margins in the business, you don't have talent. When you don't have talent, you don't have quality. It's not really that complicated. And so you just see the cycle of doom going through it. And I'm just curious about your perspective. Are you seeing a change? And is it, obviously you've gone from, US to Australia and back. Are you seeing it differently? And how do we break the cycle? Because no one's winning in this game. No
yeah.
one's winning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I quote you a lot, Clive, actually. But one of the things that I remember you saying to me at one point when we were working together was this idea that we've got all the time in the world for a really bad thing and no time for good things, and it's kind of the thing. Like, look, I think the reason that margins are challenged between clients and agencies is a question of value, and I think it's right to question the value. Um, we should have a valued relationship, but we should collectively agree what is valuable and what's not. And the things that aren't, we shouldn't be trying to put value into. And I think sometimes what agencies do is we try to hang on to things that are of declining value to a client. So we think they're important, they make us feel good. They may not be important to a business, and so therefore they are not financially viable. But I don't know that we have that conversation as adults. We have that conversation as people who need to not give anything up. So it's become a bit zero sum. And I believe, and look, there's, in Australia, there is an incredible amount of agencies here for a really small market. All of the agencies are good. So that's the other thing is there's not, it's high quality, and so, it's an embarrassment of riches if you're a client. You can decide that you're going to work with a lot of different people. And so I think one of the things that I've noticed across my career is sort of the longevity of client relationships, which I think is actually kind of fairly critical, is one of the things that suffers because you're sort of seeing clients, move around and sort of go with flavor of the month or whatever that looks like. And I know, when I think about the best work that I've done, it's been in hand with my clients, and not as a client, but as we're in this together. We are making it together. We are creating together. We are winning together. We are losing together, and that we're having the right conversations about how to manage both sides. So I reckon one of the things is having a almost like a really important conversation about what matters, and look, I think our business does itself a disservice in mattering the wrong things. Mattering, is that even a word?
It is now.
In caring about the wrong things sometimes. And I think we haven't put value around some of the parts that I think we are very good at that have higher value than perhaps clients see. And so perhaps, so things like, creativity, which is quite amorphous, but it's the potential of a brand idea is big. And again, the researcher in me wants to put a parameter around it to say how big, and how do we get um, a bit more understanding of the things that we're selling, so that they're not just, yeah, but we just like them.
Right.
And you can have a better relationship because everybody wins. But yeah, I think we're not necessarily in that mindset, because you've got a buyer's market, I think, if you're a client, and you've got a shrinking market if you're an agency. And I think clients are also just getting squeezed. Marketers are getting squeezed by boards and other parts
Right.
of their business to prove their value as well.
Right, but I mean the notion of, at its worst, the publicly traded quarterly earnings driven, board driven, uh, tension in the P&L is a reality, no question about it. And I'm spending more time now in my current world in the VC startup, pre revenue all the way to Series D and growth. But that's another set of problems, another set of challenges, and I just think that that's an excuse. To avoid addressing the issue as a client. And I always used to, when I sort of transitioned over from client to agent, from agency to client, I remember telling my former agency friends, trust me, the clients, it's not that the clients don't have money. You'd be devastated if you saw the kind of money that they're spending on other things. What they're telling you is they're not valuing you.
Yeah.
And so instead of getting angry, figure out why they're not valuing you. And it's a combination of, again, agency clients sort of convincing themselves that constantly pitching is a good thing, which it isn't. You're just moving. You're not dealing with root cause. You're just moving the problem to another location, invariably. So I'm a strong believer as a client. You build a relationship with your partner, and then you have the tough conversations, and you put in the equal sweat equity to build the right model for your business and what you're trying to accomplish. But it equally demands of agencies that they organize around what is the required outcome, which for me is, pick a word, but it's sort of commercial creativity.
Yeah.
Like I used to get all exercise when I heard agencies talking about dual peaks of creativity and business. It's like, no, it's everyone's in the business to make money. Let's just be clear about that. And that's not at odds with creativity. And for me, creativity is thinking. There's crafting, which is converting that creativity into something beautiful and well crafted. But I just wonder is, as the world has moved from post World War II analog big screen 3 network kind of thing to where we live now, which is content to commerce.
Yeah.
Both agencies and clients sort of need to rethink how they think about putting pieces together to get to an outcome, and just pitching and pitching and pitching, which is really a masquerade for driving down costs, is just disastrous in my view.
Yeah, definitely. And the kind of short-termism of expecting an instant result from everything, because everybody is on a quarterly cycle, and so something has to happen. And so it is so, and we really need to be operating at that sort of double cadence of what's growing and what's sort of winning today. And what's happening is, what sort of we're seeing is, often clients have almost different parts of their organization for that different cadence, rather than bringing it together. And I think that's the other thing is, that can become challenging is, you've got one part that can prove, value, but it's short term, and it's this did that. But and a lot of the things that certainly our agency is involved in is long-term value. And so, you kind of need to be able to prove over time that something's going to happen, but it also has an impact on today. So I think it's also, how do we better understand how everything works together, and what is the risk of being really, really short-term focused, and I think sort of lacking that foundation of,
Right.
you know, what's a brand to a business.
Right. Well, I think uh, those that split up short term, as is how do I drive a sale, from long term, which is how do I build value, do it at their own peril. Because, my view is, like, I was trained in the beginning, go to the client and tell them this story about you build equity and then one day you can convert that equity to dollars, which I feel terrible about and I'm trying to repent. And I've since realized that that's a terribly bad constructed argument. The reality is, equity is a consequential outcome of getting someone to put their hand in the pocket, give you your money, and feel awfully good about it.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I want to throw something out at you, because I'm now remembering how much I miss those sessions we used to have. But it's like, in my mind, if you look at, say, let's take Amazon for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very crudely, Amazon organizes at a household level
Mm-hmm.
first,
Yep.
and then they have brands that they sell into households. So if you're looking at a large company, pick a company, big CPG, whatever it is, they tend to organize through brands first because that's the historical way of doing it. And then there's brand managers, brand budgets, and brand. And then you have shopper, which is sort of the brick and mortar world, and the customer teams. And then now you have this e-commerce team, because that's a different thing, and they're all fractured. And I just wonder if both agencies and clients should step back and reassess the organizing construct that says we're going to lead with commerce. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a wonderful conversation with Sarah Hofstetter
Mm-hmm.
um, from Profitera, and it's if you lead with commerce, okay, and commerce is any commerce. It's shelf back, digital shelf, physical shelf back, and you organize at a household level there, and you run your data at a household level, and then brands are crucially important. I'm not suggesting that brands become any less important, but they're in service of building revenue at a household level, at a basket level, through a collection of brands. Would that change things? And that may be a really dumb idea, but I guess I'm advocating for clients and agencies to stop doing either fracturing into little bits or just building more pieces onto the
Yeah.
equation organizationally, which just adds complexity and cost. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's a mad idea or a stupid idea.
No, I think more than anything, the idea that I like in that is sort of that the answer is bespoke to the problem. And that's kind of the challenge, right? Is there's either, because there's lots of brands for whom I don't know a commerce back approach works, because the things that you need might actually be pools of demand. And so we're gonna kind of think around, where is there opportunity to kind of grow, and then, yeah, do I put a brand on top of that? Do I create a brand for that? Or, there's other categories where, like I think about luxury, where I think brand actually is the driver of demand. And so, look, I think it's that we live in this funnel world, or we have lived in this funnel world, and everybody's like, no, the funnel's dead, but we kind of still need it. Now there's a journey, and we keep trying to organize it in this systematic way. And the thing is, there's system. I love system, but the system is for the problem. And so I always think, well, even when we think about like building teams or building sort of cross-functional multidisciplinary teams, they shouldn't all work the same way. They shouldn't all look the same way. They shouldn't all be measured the same way. They may have, but they are based on, what do you need to do? And that maybe there's like, I don't know, different 3 versions of it, and that's it. But I think we fall in when we try to be too general. That the same answer is going to work for every problem, because it won't. And I think the custom build is the future. And actually, I love that. That's the part that I love, is well, what would be the right thing to work for this to work, and how can we sort of pilot something that maybe we don't have right now.
But I buy that big time. The notion of constructing to outcome versus constructing to some sort of established playbook and doing the same. But it, I guess, what would you say? The theme of this podcast is Unstuck. Okay, at the heart of what we're talking about is companies and categories and industries that are stuck.
Yeah.
So, how do you advise your clients to help them get unstuck? Because I mean, part of the world is you're in the grind and you're working against deadlines, and that's like spinning the wheel, right? It's like
Yeah.
you got to get shit out the other side.
Yeah.
But there's a more of an ethereal construct that you have to have that says, while the wheel's spinning, don't you want to think about how to stop this wheel spinning?
Yeah.
What counsel would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, it is that it's a lot of we talk about it as sort of setting the foundations, and being stuck is actually a great theme, because it's often, like, especially in creative, like, often, you think about, here's this brief and we've been going at it and we're stuck, and it's funny because often our instinct is go again. And it's not, why are we stuck, and it's probably similar with every part of a business. Like, we're not growing, why are we stuck? And so I think the advice is just to understand, again, back to it's all building blocks, is at what sits at the heart of something that we could change. Because there's lots of things that might be like, well, we're stuck because of this, but it's, so one of my big clients at the moment has a huge supply chain issue, like like everybody in the world, but
Yep.
but a particularly acute supply chain issue, that means that they cannot operate the way that they have. So, for them, we actually need to address that, because everything else is sort of a waste of time and money. And so, you've got, I think it's like, what is in our control to change that is foundationally keeping us stuck. It might be it's interesting you talk about sort of agency and clients. Like, some of what I also see that keeps us stuck is fear. We've got a fearful relationship between each other. You've got a subservient agency who doesn't want to say the things. You've got a client who also doesn't want to say the things, but also, it's interesting. Like, I was talking to one of my colleagues in another agency the other day, and she was telling me a story of, she had a new business lead come in from another holding company, and they were going okay, but they were sort of really challenged. And she called them and said, "Hey, I am here to support you. I'm not here to judge you. Like, literally, my job is to help you succeed." And they had not come from an environment where that was the case, and they were like, "Oh my God, thank God, because here are all the things I've been holding on to all of these problems. Here are the problems." And I think that is an interesting one. Again, fear might be, we don't know how to grow. We don't know if we can grow. We can't grow. The fear might be, hey, actually, the truth of it is we can't grow. We have to diversify. Like, it's looking the thing in the eye and saying what's true. And of that, what do we do with that? Can we do anything with that? Do we need to work around that? Does that, and that can be of relationship, of the business, of the model, of the, relationship to customer, of the work. Like, I think creatively, of the, hey, we're just not happy. We're just not getting where we want to get to. We've got to be open enough to have those conversations and to create space and time for them, and to do them in a way that isn't about blame. It's
Right.
actually about, moving things forward.
I mean, we could have 1 hour conversations on this topic of fear, and the one I'd like to throw in. But for me, it's fear and unlearning.
Yes.
For me, and the fear one, I don't want to go down this hole because it will require me to sort of go into confession, because my greatest failures have come from creating fear inadvertently. It's like I always wanted to create an environment where everyone just got in a room and had it out, and there was no fear, and just you called it what you called it, and you were there to solve a problem, and it wasn't about title or pressures on the business. It's like this wonderful experience just getting in and hashing it out. But unfortunately, I know in retrospect, well, I knew at the time sometimes the passion generated fear. So we should, but I would let's put a line under that because. But your point is incredibly important. Is where every time where I've seen breakthroughs, it's because there was an environment where people were not fearful,
Yeah.
or they understood that the cost of not moving forward in a way was so much less than the cost of staying where you are and playing in a little safe zone. It's that you've seen. I used to give the speech, and I had this one chart with these 2 feet on the ice, right? And it was like they paralyzed, and the reason they were paralyzed on the ice is because they're worried that if they walk forward, the ice would crack, and so they just stood where they were. And unfortunately, the longer you stay there, the sooner or later the ice is going to melt, and you will drown. So my theory was always to try and create an environment where people were like, A, the ice is not going to break, and B, if it does, the lake is only 1 foot deep and it's warm water, not freezing water. But the other thing, and this notion of unlearning, one of my things I've noticed working now with smaller startup, high growth, early stage companies is there's no institutional learning. Now that can create another set of problems, but the beauty of that is there's no institutional unlearning.
Yeah.
And I suspect a lot of the clients that you've worked with, large institutional learning, that half of the job is to try and get them to unlearn.
Yeah,
Does that resonate?
yeah, definitely. And I'm in a big agency that's got a really long history, and we've got a bit of unlearning, because we're not born modern. We're born, I always say we're born foundational, like, but it's, and then that's got its own sort of challenges. But yeah, look, it's interesting. I think clients in a lot of categories, are, you think about, like, most of the clients that we work with, certainly a lot of my clients in the US were in the midst of massive disruption. So these were big, mainstream American brands who, had always had the market work a certain way, and now it doesn't. And the sort of, they are grappling with that. And so, the grappling with that often is, let's innovate around the edges. And so, but a lot of the work that we were brought in to do was fix the big thing. And it's really hard, because you're right, you have to unlearn, hey, that works, that doesn't, we've always done it this way, all of that kind of behavior. And I think, just, it's interesting, because I find that those bigger things often was what needed to take the biggest risks, and were most, it was the most sort of stuck, because the risk was seen as risky. When you think, actually, that, to the ice metaphor, like, the risk actually is staying exactly where you are.
The
And
greatest.
I think they eventually got there on a lot of instances, but too late for some brands, I think, because they've sort of missed the window of, you kind of didn't go when you should have gone. And um, it's hard, because, I think about just so many of my clients where they've got, well, this is sort of the core, and then we need to be recruiting sort of new people, new things, creating new behaviors. But it's all that, and the only way to do it is with new things. And so they're always left with these sort of big, lumpy brands in the middle that are kind of standing up like a sore thumb, that are like, hey, but we make all the money. So it's it's interesting. They're the problems I love, though, because I think if you can turn those things into something new, and create some sort of difference around how those teams work, it's more substantial.
Last, I just I'm reminded of those sessions with Britt and Jordan and you, and we did. And you said something. You used the word love, particularly in the
Mhm.
last thing. It's like my last question for you, because we're at time, is how, like, I always wanted to ask you this, but I was too busy bouncing off the walls and yelling and screaming and drawing pictures. And going crazy. It's like, how do you keep this level of calm and optimism? Like, what are you on? Like, it's so important. Like, again, I look back and sort of periodically go, where did I screw up? And then the list gets super long. But at the heart of all my missteps has been an inability to keep calm. And so I'm always envious of people like you who are able to sort of keep calm and inject the sort of, it's going to be okay, we're going to work this out, let's not get hysterical. Where does this come from? Tell me the secret.
God, that's deep psychology. Because look, a little bit of it I think is Australian, like because what are you going to do? It's kind of like it's quite practical. I'm very pragmatic, which is, well, what can we do and what can't we do? Actually, Andrew Swinand, my old boss, and one of the things that he taught me that I take to just about every day is don't hold on too tight. And it's brilliant advice for life, for career, for everything, because there are things that you can control, there are things that you can influence, and there's everything else, right? And I get interested in the things that I can have an impact on. And look, there's so much stuff that I'm terrible at, and sort of is best left to others. But I know where my time can be potent, and so that's sort of where my calmness comes from. That's possible. Let's get after that. And you mentioned like Britt and Jordan, and I've had incredible, like they're two really calm humans. Like Britt's very calm, very like, gosh, if you want to go into a war with a person, you take him. I'm very lucky to have had partners who are of the same ilk, which is nothing's impossible. And it's a team sport. It's not, the pressure isn't on me as an individual. Nothing bad is going to happen. And that's what I try to instill in my team is you have to think about what's possible, not what's impossible. So, because you'll go mad because there's so much stuff that's impossible. And
you'll turn into me.
Yeah, you have to create the room for what you can do, and that's exciting because then it's action oriented, and and we get after what we can. And like I love change. Change is great. I love learning things. I love trying things. Love building things. And you have to kind of focus on the things that are, well, let's try this thing. If you press this button, what happens? And keep that mindset, because we'll always be creating value while we're fixing stuff.
Well, there you hear it, Emma Montgomery. The reason why I've been so excited about doing this podcast, and more importantly, sharing with you my weekly conversations back in the day that kept me insane and on point. So cool talking to you again. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, and, lovely to chat. And I'm super excited to kind of just to have this as a topic, and always grateful for any time that I get with you, Clive. Always.
Amen. Well, thank you for that. We'll talk soon. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit ScreenDragon.com to see our software in action.